My name is Gwen Borowski. I'm the CEO of the National Liberty Museum. I'm really delighted to welcome you here today. And the intrepid ones who came out despite the pouring rain, we're glad you're here. I'm also a board member of FPRI, have been involved with them for many years. Alan Luxenberg asked how we would feel about hosting this program. And I said, not only do I feel fine, I think it's appropriate that it be held here. While there are many strong feelings and opinions, and for very good reason, there is also an urgent, tremendous need for some dialogue. And hopefully we can start something here today. And I know we have people here who are respectful of that. So it is my pleasure to welcome you here today, and I think without any further ado, I will turn the program over to Alan, who will introduce our guest. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's also my pleasure to not only today's event, but many events throughout the year. Now, many of you know that FPRI was founded in 1955. I guess I have to use a different microphone. Many of you know that FPRI was founded in 1955 on the premise that a nation should think before it acts. And some of you have seen our FPRI PAC, which we produced last year to kind of update our slogan to fit with the times. Therefore, it reads, "Make America Think Again." And this program, as all our programs, are designed to make you think again. As I've mentioned on other occasions, FPRI has 100 affiliated scholars, and they have 101 opinions on most subjects. The only thing we have in common is that we are in here to preserve American national security and to promote a peaceful world order. How to get there is subject to debate. Now, sometimes I remind our scholars, even though they don't really need any reminding, that whatever we articulate, we should do so dispassionately. And in fact, our unofficial slogan, borrowed from the French diplomat Talleyrand, is, above all, no zeal. If the honest search for truth is something you can endorse, then we ask you to support FPRI. If you already support FPRI, then we ask you to increase your support, because there is nothing more important than the honest search for truth, especially now. Now today, as Gwen mentioned, we're gathered here to discuss the future of Israel and Palestine. This subject evokes great passions on all sides. So let me be clear. This is not the time or the place to manifest those passions. For the next 60 minutes, we absolutely require everyone to be respectful, even of opinions you may strenuously disagree with. As it happens, this moment may be the best of times and the worst of times for a two-state solution. It may be said that it's the worst of times because the entire Middle East region, the state system of this region, is breaking down. Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen can hardly be said to exist anymore, at least as we have come to know them. And we have no idea what will replace them. How, under these circumstances, can we possibly add a new Middle East state, especially one that in its current pre-state condition, it has two governments, two militaries, and an economy dependent on foreign aid. To add such a state to such a region does not seem to make sense, or so one might argue. On the other hand, this may be the best of times. The recent nuclear agreement with Iran and Iran's continuing quest for hegemony in the region has inadvertently made tacit allies out of Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others. That alliance would only be solidified were there to be a resolution of the Israel-Palestine dispute. And in some sense, all these states have good geopolitical reasons to facilitate a resolution of the conflict. And both Israel and the Palestinians actually need the encouragement of the Arab states in order for them to come to terms with each other. This leaves us with a lot of questions. Is this a good time for the two-state solution? What can each side do to build trust on the part of the other side? What is the role of outside powers in promoting a resolution of the conflict? To explore these questions and others, I would like to introduce our guest, Ambassador Maen Rashid Areikat. Ambassador Areikat serves as Chief Representative of the Palestine Liberation Organization to the United States since May 2009. Previously, Ambassador Areikat served 11 years at the Negotiation Affairs Department of the PLO in Ramallah, most recently as its Deputy Head and Coordinator General. He first joined the Negotiation Affairs Department in 1998 when it was headed by Mahmoud Abbas, and served as its Director General until March 2008. He provided legal, policy, communication, and technical support to Palestinian negotiating teams. He took part in the Palestinian-Israeli negotiations in Gaza and Taba in 1996, in Jerusalem in 1997, and was an official member of the Palestinian delegation at the Wye River negotiations in 1998. He earned his bachelor's degree in finance from Arizona State University and his MBA in management from Western International University. He received his diplomatic training at the Ministry of External Affairs in Ottawa and completed a training course in good governance at the JFK School of Government at Harvard. I told him we won't hold his stint at Harvard against him. Before we begin, let me explain that I will ask some questions of the ambassador for the next 30 to 40 minutes, and then I will turn to you to further ask questions until we fill out the hour. Let me remind you, we want questions, not speeches, and like I tell our scholars, above all, no zeal. Ambassador Areikat, you've been involved in negotiations for a long time. What lessons do you draw from that experience, and what is your vision of the future?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Alan and Sally, it was a pleasure. We met back in October in my office, and that's how this idea came up. And it is a pleasure to be here, although I was hoping the weather would be better than this, you know. But I think an important issue that continues to divide Palestinians and Israelis is the issue of trust and the issue of the historical narrative of both sides. I think for a certain period of time, we Palestinians, when we refused to recognize Israel, thought that by recognizing Israel, we will be conceding our national rights, and we will be giving up our rights to the land that we still consider to be our ancestors' land. And the Israelis, for a certain period of time, also thought that acknowledging that the Palestinian people exist and have legitimate rights also means that their own narrative and their own story will be null and void. And in the 90s, when we had a very courageous leadership on the part of Israel and a very pragmatic Palestinian leadership, with Prime Minister Rabin and the late President Arafat, the two managed to somehow break that barrier and focus more on the outcomes of an end to the conflict, an end to this struggle between the two peoples, in a way that we both realize that it will be a win-win situation for us to reach an end to the conflict. Unfortunately, you all know how things progressed in the mid-90s, the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin, and then the election of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Palestinian attacks against Israelis, and then the second intifada, and then we kind of went downhill from that point on. So a major element and factor is the psychological and the historical narrative perspective of both sides. We both think that by acknowledging the right of the other, that we will be undermining our own claims and rights in the same land. Future, I don't see personally any solution to this conflict other than finding an accommodation that is acceptable to both sides. We tried the military struggle, the armed struggle. Israel tried to use force, military force, on many occasions, excessive use of force, disproportionate use of force, to try to crush the Palestinians' demand for statehood, independence, and freedom. And we tried to also fight the Israelis using military means and violence in order to also impact Israeli decisions and policies. And we both failed using the military struggle and the armed struggle and violence. We failed to reach an acceptable agreement. So I don't see any other alternative but eventually for the two sides to sit and agree on the most important issues that have been mentioned in previous agreements: Jerusalem, settlements, borders, security, refugees, and water, in order to reach that elusive agreement that would put an end to this conflict, put an end to all historical claims. And this is something that Prime Minister Netanyahu and many Israelis ignore, that President Abbas, in all his speeches, statements, he said, I want an end to the conflict and an end to all historical claims. However, nobody in Israel and unfortunately in this country seems to pay attention to that very important and historical claims, which means that our objective of a two-state solution is not tactical. It's, to us, it will represent the end of the road, and it will not be a stepping stone to ask for more and try to retrieve what used to be us prior to 1948. So I think this Palestinian leadership is still willing to reach an agreement with Israel if we find a willing partner on the part of Israel.
Well, I think the same might be said on the part of the Israelis. They would like to see a two-state solution if they could find a willing partner. It seems to me that there are polls that suggest that a majority of Israelis and Palestinians actually support, if they don't actively support a two-state solution, then they are willing to acquiesce in a two-state solution. And yet, the majority of both sides also find it difficult to believe that the other side really wants a two-state solution. So I guess the question I would like to pose to you is, if there are three things that the Israelis can do and the Palestinians can do to build trust on the other side, what would they be?
Well, I think the most important thing is to accept the other as an equal partner. In our negotiations with the Israelis, the most difficult issue was you are an occupied people negotiating with your occupying power. And that in and by itself create an unequal situation where, even if the Israelis are not doing it practically, but it gives the impression and that the Israelis are talking from a position of strength. They are occupying your land. They control every aspect of your life, and you are sitting across the table with them on equal footing. But however, it's not equal. I mean, for sure it's not equal. And so I would say number one is to accept that there are certain legitimate needs and concerns for each party. And you should not preclude the realization of these legitimate concerns by putting conditions like in the case of Israel. Okay, we'll allow the Palestinians to have an independent state, but we will do that only if they can secure or guarantee Israel's security. I mean, it never happened before that an occupied people are asked to secure and guarantee the security of the occupying power. So you need to understand, we call it put yourself in each other's shoes. For quite some time, I thought that the Israelis were exaggerating about their security needs and security concerns. I know it has something to do with their history, with Jewish history, not with Israel's history, with Jewish history. And that kind of moved on with them even after the creation of the State of Israel. Now, at the same time, I believe that certain Israeli leaders, political leaders, use that history to justify certain policies that they are taking against the Palestinians. I'm not saying, that, because of that history, because we can't trust anybody, we cannot let the Palestinians control their own destiny and have their own state. So you need to create a certain understanding of their legitimate concerns. They do have legitimate security concerns. But when you try to control 1,000 square kilometers of land to protect a 2 square kilometer settlement, I mean, how can you convince me that the 998 square kilometers are needed for the security of that settlement? It's definitely is not a legitimate security concern. The other thing is, I think, is to once again believe that this is going to be a win-win. It's not going to be a zero-sum game. It is a win-win game for both sides, because the alternative is continued conflict, continued tension, and bloodshed and loss of innocent life on both sides. And the third is the future. Okay, the future for us Palestinians. We need to reach a situation where we can finally feel that we have our own independent state and we can live freely in our own country, have peace with our neighbors, but also for Israel. If Israel is planning to stay in that part of the world, they need to make peace with their neighbors. And who are their immediate neighbors? The Palestinians. I mean, this reminds me of a story. I was flying from London to Tel Aviv. Next to me was an Israeli citizen. So, he asked me, where are you from? I said, I'm your neighbor. And he looked at me and said, oh, Jordan? I said, what happened to the ones in between you and Jordan, in the West Bank, in Jericho? I'm a Palestinian. Oh, he said. So, they have to understand that if they want to continue to live in peace in that part of the world, they have to make peace with the Palestinians. And we will be the bridge, like you mentioned earlier, to peace with the larger Arab and Muslim world.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is what confidence-building measures can be undertaken by the two sides. I know that, for example, Dennis Ross, who has been the American negotiator between Israelis and Palestinians for numerous administrations, he has suggested, for example, that Israel should freeze construction outside of the security barrier. The Israelis should build up, should allow more economic activity in Area C of the West Bank. There may be other confidence-building measures that Israel can engage in to persuade the Palestinians that we are serious. Oh, and the other major confidence-building measure that Dennis suggested was basically forswearing any hopes of annexing the West Bank and Gaza. So if the Israelis do that, and the Palestinians can rest easier, perhaps, in trying to resolve this problem, what can the Palestinians do to allay the concerns of Israelis?
Well, first of all, this is a political conflict. It's not a religious conflict because we Palestinians strongly reject turning this conflict between us and Israel into a religious one. And we have always continuously warned that turning it into a religious conflict is going to be destructive for both sides, especially if you look at the region today and you see the turmoil, the instability, like you mentioned, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, and the rise of extremists in those countries and how they are using religion to further their political objectives. So by offering quick fixes, you may be able to control the situation for a short period of time. However, you really need to address the core issues of this conflict. Of course, Area C is 60% of the West Bank. I don't know if the audience here knows that 60% of the West Bank is under full Israeli control, military and civilian, which means we have no access to 60% of the West Bank. We have control over only 18% of the West Bank, the major cities, and even those 18%, or this 18% is continuously on daily basis penetrated, violated by Israeli troops and army who go into these areas to arrest Palestinians and shoot Palestinians and come out. The other 22%, which is joint control, Area B they call it, is under security Israeli control and civilian Palestinian control. So, okay, if you want to continue that piecemeal approach, let's fix the economy. Let's give the Palestinians more access to the Area C, which is important because you mentioned that we rely on foreign aid. The Palestinians 4 or 5 years ago submitted the proposals to the Israeli side when a meeting took place between Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Abbas with President Obama in 2010. 2010, yes, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. We said we want to exploit Area C. We want to generate, create jobs, generate revenues. Had they allowed us to go ahead with the projects that we submitted to them, the Palestinians would be independent of any international aid. It would have generated between $3 to $4 billion annually of revenues to the Palestinian economy. The Israelis refused. The Americans tried, they refused. So I am not a fan of, let's do this here, let's do that here. We need, because I'm telling you from our experience, from the Oslo Agreement. The Oslo Agreement, when it was signed between the PLO and Israel, the reason they deferred Jerusalem, refugees, and all these sensitive issues, because they were complex. They thought that by creating an interim agreement, interim period, the two sides will get used to each other, they will be nice to each other, and then it will be easier to discuss the more complex issues at a later stage. Unfortunately, what happened is totally the opposite. Things deteriorated, we lost trust in each other, and then nobody discussed these important issues. So I am a strong proponent of put all these issues on the table. Come and sit on the table, let's draw the lines, let's draw the map. Let's agree on all these trade-offs between all these various issues. You cannot pick and choose. Israel say, I want security. I say, okay, I want Jerusalem. No, you bring all these issues on the table, you agree on the trade-offs, and you come up with an agreement that both can live with and they can survive for many years to come.
Well, when I began this program, I gave a little recitation on the best of times and the worst of times. Is this a good time to have the kind of discussion you're talking about?
Well, if not now, when? I mean,
Quote somebody.
This is always the situation or the question that we were faced with. Is this a good time? Neither side is ready. The Palestinians are not ready. The Israelis are not going. I've been listening or hearing these excuses excuses for a long time that what the Israelis are going to offer is much less than what the Palestinians will accept, or what the Palestinians want is much more what the Israelis are willing to offer, you know? Of course, I mean, because if they were, both expectations were the same, there would be no conflict. You know, this would have been resolved long time ago. So it's natural that our expectations are different from Israeli expectations. However, that's why you need to come and head on with all these issues. You cannot defer them. When we were involved with Secretary Kerry 2 years ago, a little bit more than 2 years, almost 3 years ago, in 2014, with his 9-month shuttle diplomacy, Secretary Kerry came back to us and said, you know what? Prime Minister Netanyahu cannot discuss the issue of Jerusalem. Why? Because of his coalition. So if he discusses it, that means his coalition will unravel. And okay, when will he be willing or able to discuss Jerusalem? If he cannot discuss it, he cannot discuss refugees. Why? Because it's for the same reason. You cannot. You know, we Palestinians have taken a very, very bold moves in the last 20 years, from recognizing Israel right to exist. In 1988, the Palestine National Council accepted the two-state solution, renounced violence, and agreed to recognize 242 and 338. 1993, we exchanged letters, recognized Israel. In 1996 and 1998, twice, the Palestine National Council met to declare clauses of the Palestine National Charter null and void if they contravene or contradict with the peace agreement between Israel and the PLO. So we've done our share. And people, until today, Prime Minister says, we need the Palestinians to recognize Israel's right to exist. We did that. We have it in writing. And we say Israel. We say two states living side by side, Israel and Palestine. We do not shy away from mentioning Israel. Until today, there is no Israeli leader in this current government who has the courage to go in front of the Israeli people and say, I am in favor of two states, Palestine and Israel, living side and side. So we've come a long way in psychologically accepting Israel and practically taking steps to prepare our people to accept the ultimate conclusion of any agreement with Israel, which would lead to a Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with Israel.
Well, there's an elephant in the room, and that is Hamas. There have been reports recently that they are amending their charter to take out the blatantly anti-Semitic parts of it, to recognize, to accept a Palestinian state in West Bank and Gaza, though not necessarily a Jewish state next door. They've named a new leader who is perhaps more militant than the old leadership.
Are you talking about the military wing or the political? They named two.
Yahya Sinwar.
Yahya Sinwar is the military wing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the political wing is Ismail Haniyeh, who replacing Khalid Mashal. So they have two wings,
Okay.
The political and the military.
Nonetheless, so where do you think Hamas is going, and can there be a peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians so long as Hamas resembles in any way what it has always been?
Well, let me first of all be careful with the use of anti-Semitic, okay? Because we are Semites. I don't know if people know that we are Semites, okay? Again, I remember when I went to school, we had, like stands and Palestinian, General Union of Palestinian Students next to us, the Hillel student organization, and they had a banner with an arrow pointing to us and saying, this group next to us is anti-Semites. So the Americans come and say, are you anti-Semites? I said, how can we be anti ourselves? We are Semites. So I want you to understand one thing. There is no official Palestinian policy of promoting anti-Semitism or even promoting anti-Jewish sentiments, and feelings. On the contrary, we pride ourselves by saying always that throughout history, not Palestinians, but Muslims in general, have been very kind and treated Jews in the best way possible. And if you look back at the history, after the Crusaders, when the Crusaders kicked the Jews out of Jerusalem, it was Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, the Muslim leader who conquered Jerusalem, who allowed Jews to come back to Jerusalem to practice their religion and to worship in Jerusalem. So this notion of anti-Semitism, even Hamas, I don't think that you can describe them as anti-Semitic. They are anti-Israeli. Yes, of course. And there is a major debate in this country. Richard Cohen wrote a piece today in Washington Post. I was reading it from on the way here, in which he said that he is opposed to all these Israeli policies and legislations that are preventing people who are critical of Israel from entering Israel. There is a big difference between being critical of Israeli policies and being anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitic, you are targeting a group of people, Jews and other Semites, just because they are Jews and you are attacking them for their beliefs and for their faith and what have you. And Hamas is a political organization that is opposed to Israel. They are talking about changing their charter. And we have been waiting. I've heard it when I was back home 2 weeks ago. They haven't yet announced it. The military wing leader, Yahya Sinwar, I don't know. I mean, I don't know their structure, but the political structure, the person who's taking from Khalid Mash'al Ismail Haniyeh, he was the prime minister of a Palestinian National Unity government back in 2006. And I think that there is a good chance that Hamas could transform itself into a pragmatic political organization. And we have discussed with them over the years the need to change their tactic in their struggle against Israel. We are telling them every day, this military struggle, this armed struggle, the violence is not going to lead anywhere. We, the PLO, resorted to that. And we are the ones who started that in the mid-60s. And we reached the conclusion that if you want to solve this conflict, it only can be solved politically and through peaceful means. So we are continuously trying to convince them to transform themselves into a political organization and to be more pragmatic in their approach. I hope this charter would be, or this new policy political platform will be announced soon. My understanding, it will include the Palestinian state on the 1967 borders, very, very similar to the PLO, political platform. But, Hamas is one group within the Palestinian society. It's opposed to an agreement with Israel currently. However, the majority, like you alluded, of Palestinians still believe that the two-state solution is still viable and feasible.
Well, let me just ask one more question before I open it up to our audience, which is to ask you about the role of youth in the Palestinian territories and in Israel. Do you see the next generation as being more compromising or more militant?
That's a very tough question, because for a certain period of time, following the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993 and during what I call the golden years, 93 to 96, until after the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin, I thought that these exchanges, the youth exchanges and the people-to-people efforts between Palestinians and Israelis were yielding some really good results, because, you can sign peace treaties between leaders, but it's the people of the two countries who will make peace eventually. And these exchanges were important. Unfortunately, the political developments that followed the deterioration in the situation prevented these exchanges from continuing. And today, the youths on both sides, for different reasons, I can understand why Palestinian youths are kind of drifting more, not to extremism, but to reaching a point that they don't have faith anymore in the ability of their leadership to deliver on a political solution or to end the occupation or to obtain independence for the. They have a strong disappointment that their leadership did not deliver, which weakens the Palestinian leadership, which calls for peace and coexistence with Israel. They just see the situation on the ground, the settlements, the wall, the closures, the restrictions of movement, and they say, what peace are you talking about? On the Israeli side, I mean, this is, the feeling among Palestinian youth is both a result of lack of progress on the ground and the inability of the leadership to deliver. On the Israeli side, you have a prosperous country where youths are very successful. They don't experience the same conditions that Palestinian youths experience in terms of moving, traveling, doing, and yet they are also drifting more away from believing that a peace is possible. And here I blame the current Israeli government who for over the last 8-9 years managed to export the culture of fear to these youths and to continue to present the Palestinians and the Arabs as being, we are after Israel and we want to undermine Israel's existence and we want to undermine Israel's legitimate concerns, etc., etc. So it was the making of this government that deliberately created that atmosphere of fear and paranoia among Israelis that Palestinians and Arabs and their neighbors, everybody's after Israel. And in a way, it impacted the way youth think. So definitely, in order to create better conditions conducive to dialogue, you need the leadership on both sides to start taking steps, to dispel some of these, factors or issues that have, separated the two sides. And honestly, I don't see this happening anytime soon, unfortunately.
Okay, we'll open it up for questions. One of our staff will come to you with a microphone. Be sure to speak directly into the microphone. I can barely see you with the lights and flashing in my eyes, so I'll let our staff pick the questions.
So basically, you talked about a two-state solution, and you gave a list of 3 things that could be done. The UN has held discussions on this. It's an ongoing issue. As the UN holds discussions, what do you feel has been the challenge with the UN support overall as they have discussions and as they're looking into different cases?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase it?
What has been your challenge in terms of foreign assistance, in terms of the UN? Mm-hmm. What has been the challenge in terms of the UN trying to make attempts with this two-state solution?
Well, the United Nations, since its creation, I mean, has been successful in some areas and unsuccessful in others. Definitely the Middle East, the Arab-Israeli conflict is one area where the United Nations has failed in creating or making peace between the two sides. Now, many accuse the UN of being biased toward Israel. Today, actually, the UN is being handicapped, crippled by U.S. opposition to any effort on part of this international organization to at least see to it that UN resolutions pertinent to the conflict are implemented. You have dozens and dozens of UN resolutions on the conflict that are not implemented and were rejected by Israel and were never had the chance for implementation. So we Palestinians have an interest in seeing a larger role for the United Nations. Actually, we don't want this effort to remain bilateral. When I say we don't want it to remain bilateral, I am not saying that the agreement will be multilateral. Whatever agreement that will take place between Israelis and Palestinians will be bilateral. That means that both Israelis have in the end to sign on the same agreement. But in order to get to that agreement, we need to include more than the United States in the efforts of reaching peace between the two sides. The United States has been, the sponsor. Everything has been done under the auspices of the United States for the last 23 years, 24 years, and nothing materialized. So that process has failed. We need to come up with a multilateral. You mentioned Iran. And we asked the Americans, and why not a similar formula for Israel-Palestine like Iran, where the United Nations, Russia, EU, and we can include these regional powers that, Iran and Iran. I will warn you about expecting any changes soon among Arab countries vis-a-vis Israel. That's an illusion. It will never happen. Arab countries are not going to normalize relations with Israel until the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is resolved. Even if their governments wants to do so, their street and the people in those countries are not going to allow it. It's not like because they are anti-Israeli, they want to see Israel destroyed or all that talk. No, because they feel with the Palestinians that they want to see the plight of the Palestinian people ended. So we need a multilateral international approach for resolving the conflict that will include the United Nations, Russia, United States, of course the Palestinians and the Israelis, and regional powers such as Egypt, Jordan, and some Gulf countries. But to keep that confined to the U.S. sending an envoy, and the envoy come back here, and then Prime Minister Netanyahu sends an envoy to have coffee and talk about the settlements and decide what is good for the administration and Israel, and ignoring the Palestinians, the owners of the land, whose land is being grabbed and stolen every day, doesn't make any sense.
Ask you about Hamas, and I disagree with your view of Hamas. I look at Hamas as an anti-Semitic organization. My definition of anti-Semite or anti-Semitism is anti-Jewish or anti-Israel, so we might have a disagreement over the definition. My specific question about Hamas is, I've read a number of observers, Arab journalists, Arab Israeli journalists, Israeli intelligence officials who have said, if the IDF in Israel was not in Judea, Samaria, the so-called West Bank, that Hamas would take over in 3 to 5 days. What is your opinion of that?
Well, listen, to disagree, I respect disagreement. I mean, you can disagree with me until next year, that's fine. But for you to tell me Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, I mean, I don't think that's a good starting point, because we're going back in history. And then, you're going to get us into a long argument about who was there first, who has the right to be there. I was before you, you were before me, and then we're going to end up not solving anything. We want to look to the future, okay? If you want to keep talking about 3,000 years ago, I can go back 5,000 years ago. They found the other day in Israel, they found,
We won't go there.
Huh?
We won't go there.
No, we won't go there. But they found the skeleton of people who were so huge in size that they dated them back to 5,000 years ago. And that's where we always say we are the tribe of the huge in our talk. So that might be the Palestinians. You never know. Does this mean that I'm come today and tell the Israelis, you don't have the right to be there, you have to leave? No. So anti-Semitism, please do not mix anti-Semitism with being anti-Israeli policies. And even among the American Jewish community today, many are arguing that they have the right to be critical of Israeli policies because they are concerned about Israel. American Jews and Jewish communities are concerned about Israel. And this, you can talk about the West Bank being Judea and Samaria for however you want, how long you want. But I am coming to that. Believe me. I am. I'm not the
Okay,
type
Don.
who avoid answering questions. So I just want, because you made that introduction there, I have to respond to that, you know. So I don't think it's useful to try in even your political statements to confirm something that to Palestinians is totally rejected and unacceptable. You can call it Judea and Samaria, it's not going to change the fact that it is the West Bank. Okay? Secondly, Hamas. I answered. You said that Hamas is anti-Semitic because anti-Jewish and anti-Israeli. I don't see anything in Israel, in Hamas's political doctrine that directly say that they are anti-Jewish. They do not recognize Israel. And they say that we will not recognize Israel until Israel ends its occupation of the Palestinian people and allow the Palestinians to be free and independent. So they look at our experience with Israel when we when we accepted a state on 22% of what used to be historical Palestine in order to make peace. 23 years of negotiations led to what? 600,000 settlers living in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, wall, restriction of movement. So they look at us and say, what political engagement you want us to have with the Israelis when for 23 years the PLO failed in producing independence or bringing independence to the Palestinian people. So they are taking our experience as a case study with the Israelis. And they are rejecting to move in that direction because, unfortunately, consecutive Israeli governments did not empower the Palestinian leadership by reaching an acceptable agreement with them that then this leadership can go and say, you see what we produced? We managed through political dialogue with Israel to bring about peace and independence. And I'm not defending Hamas here.
We have questions in the front too, by the way.
By the way, there's a website called Pal Watch, which is Palestinian Media Watch, which actually records public Palestinian TV, and it's replete with quotes on Palestinian television referring to Jews as the sons of pigs and monkeys and so forth. You may or may not be aware of that. But anyway, my question is, why is it okay that nearly 20% of Israelis are Israeli Arabs, and that seems to be okay, yet there seems to be in the mind of the Palestinian Arabs the principle that Palestinian Arabs cannot have a state until Judea and Samaria and the disputed territories, Eastern Jerusalem, is Judenrein, is completely free of Jews. Why is it okay to have a minority Arab presence in Israel proper, but there can't be any Jews in this future Palestinian state? And do you feel that that's inherently racist?
That question got me in trouble in 2011. And it was on the pages of USA Today because a journalist asked me if I am willing to allow Israeli settlers to remain in a future Palestinian state. And my answer was clear, and I'm going to make the same answer. That as, you know, once we have peace with Israel, once I have my own state, and I have my own independence after an agreement with Israel, okay, I would like to see a situation where Palestinians can visit Israel and Israelis can visit Palestine. I want Israelis to be visitors in my country, not settlers and occupiers. What you want me to accept is to allow Israeli settlers who came to my country, took my land, built illegal settlements, and they are the most radical and extreme of the Israeli society, to stay in the midst of my future state. And you want me to accept Israeli army to remain in my country for 99 years, with maybe another 99 years, with an option for another 99 years, so that they can maintain security in a sovereign future, a sovereign future Palestinian state. That will never happen. However, in a normal situation, two countries living side by side in peace, I don't see why Israelis cannot come, why they cannot come and do business in a Palestinian state, why we cannot go to Israel and do business. We did that in the first 20 years of the Israeli occupation. It was easy to move around. So there is no, forget about Judenrein, please, these Nazi terms. We do not compare us. That's an insult for us to try to compare us to a monster that was dedicated on exterminating a whole race. We are not. So this Judenrein, which a friend of mine told me after the Elliot Abrahams accused me that I am promoting the Nazi policy of Judenrein. I didn't know what it meant, but it means whitening Germany from the Jews. We're not trying to do that. And there is a big difference between an Israeli citizen who comes to visit a future Palestinian state and an illegal settler or an occupation soldier who is harassing, humiliating, and oppressing my people. You cannot equate between the two, okay? And you know, if you want, what was the first part of your question?
Well, this is more of like a boss. This is more of a direct quote where he flat out.
Oh, the media. You spoke about the media, about incitement, about incitement. We never denied that we have incitement. We never denied it. But you want to tell me that Israelis don't incite against Palestinians? You want to tell me about the chief rabbi who called us snakes and cockroaches? And you want to tell me about the member of Knesset during the war on Gaza, who said that it will be okay, legitimate to kill Palestinian women because they have monsters or snakes in their pregnant in their. That's official incitement against the Palestinians. I am against incitement. We formed at the Wye River agreement a trilateral committee, anti-incitement trilateral committee, Israel, Palestine, the United States. The United States and Israel, for the last 10 years, refused to accept our demand to activate that committee. We have been asking them every time we meet with them. You talk about incitement, we acknowledge we have incitement. But on the Israeli side, there is official incitement. Incitement by members of Knesset, incitement by religious leaders. You see incitement on the Palestinian side, you see it from individually, but the TV, you know, calling between, you know, I mean, these derogatory, you know, names of Jews. And I challenge you now, if you can find something in a Palestinian, official Palestinian media outlet, because we are trying to take care of all these instances. And when they happen individually, and they are not part of an official Palestinian policy. Let me conclude, because that's an important issue, because that's a big demand. Prime Minister Netanyahu says, okay, the Palestinians, he said that even today or yesterday at AIPAC, before we can even move with the Palestinians, they need to educate their children, not to hate, not to do that. Excuse me? How can I educate my children not to hate when they see in their own eyes what the Israeli army is doing every day in the West Bank, the way they humiliate the Palestinians, the way they treat them? How can I control the emotions of people when they see a soldier shooting a youth and killing him point blank, or humiliating a woman, or going into a town or a village and they break into a house at night to arrest people? How can I control their emotions? You want me to tell them that occupation is good? I can't tell my people that occupation is good. So the best way to end incitement is to end the occupation. If you end the occupation, you make peace between the two sides, neither side would have to say bad things about the other. But don't tell me that you want me to, to deal with the symptoms before I can deal with the root causes of this conflict.
We'll go on to a new question.
The last time that there were serious progress towards a solution was, at least to my recollection, publicly. I know there was a period where there was some private negotiations subsequent, was at the end of the Clinton administration. I understand you were part of that discussion. What's your perception of why it didn't move to a final settlement, and what lessons have you learned or can you share with that could elucidate why that didn't happen and we can use for the future.
So you're talking about the Camp David 2000?
Camp David.
Well, I think you should also keep in mind that the Olmert-Abu Mazen discussions in 2006, 2000 actually went beyond the Camp David of 2000. You know, the two leaders met, I think, 50 times, 60 times, one-on-one. They discussed all issues, including refugees. And they were very close, actually, to reaching an agreement, had it not been to, you know, Olmert being implicated there. And so that didn't happen. Too, I think maybe fate intervened, you know, and prevented them from continuing their dialogue. But I can tell you that during those discussions, a lot of progress was made on so many issues. And if they were given, if they had a few more months, we might have been able to reach something acceptable to both sides. Camp David, both sides were not ready. Both sides were not ready. Barak was not ready, Arafat was not ready. When Madeleine Albright came to Ramallah in July of 2000 to ask President Arafat to accept the invitation to go to Camp David, President Arafat told her, I don't think we are ready to sign an agreement. Somebody planted in the minds of the US administration that if you put Arafat and Barak the same way Carter put Menachem Begin and Sadat, that they will be able to reach an agreement. And neither side was ready for that. However, the Americans went through, and our only request of the Americans was one simple request. Give us your promise that if things don't work out for some reason, that you will not come up publicly and blame us, because we always get the blame for not making a deal. And they gave us a promise, and unfortunately they broke it, because after it failed, Barak accused us, and then President Clinton came out and said the Palestinians missed an opportunity to sign an agreement. I think, one, they were not prepared. Two, we wanted a cover from the Arab countries on issues like Jerusalem and refugees that we didn't manage. And three, Israeli demands of control for a long period of land. I mean, the Israelis offered, I think in the end, 89% of the West Bank, taking 11%. So the swap in land that we provided, which was 1-to-1, in the end ended up being 1-to-9 or 1-to-10. And, you know, we just thought it was not fair. Jerusalem was not resolved. Refugees was not resolved. So basically, the fundamental issues were not properly addressed to allow President Arafat and the Palestinians at the time to accept what was offered on the table.
I'm afraid it's 12:30. We're going to have to bring the Q&A to an end. I know there are many questions still, but this was an illuminating discussion. I am reminded that Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, said in describing the dispute between Israelis and Palestinians, it's not a matter of right and wrong, it's a matter of two rights. And I think you hit on that theme somewhere in your remarks. I want to thank you, Ambassador, for joining us.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.